Have you ever wondered why you're exhausted? Even when you're doing everything right? You wake up early, you journal, you hit the gym, you chase goals with fire in your chest, and yet, somewhere between the calendar alerts and the self-help mantras, you feel off, like something inside you is misfiring. There's a tightness in your chest that won't go away, a pressure behind your eyes you've learned to ignore. You push harder, but the joy is gone. The meaning feels distant. And when you stop, just for a second, it all catches up. Let me be honest with you. This isn't progress. It's emotional misalignment disguised as ambition. And the truth is brutal. You're not being driven. You're being hijacked. That constant restlessness you've been calling hunger, that's burnout wrapped in dopamine dysregulation. That numbness you call discipline, it's your nervous system screaming for emotional recalibration. You're not chasing success. You're running from a void. And every time you ignore what you're actually feeling, you betray yourself a little more. No one told you this because no one profits from it. They sell you habits, hacks, and hustle, but they never teach you the one skill that makes all of them work: emotional calibration. The ability to pause and ask yourself, honestly, what am I actually feeling right now? Is this motivation or fear? Is this momentum or pressure? Without emotional discipline, ambition collapses. It turns you into a high-performance machine that eventually self-destructs. But here's the shift. When you master this one habit, when you finally learn to track, name, and reframe your emotional state in real time, everything changes. Your ambition stops being a storm and becomes a compass. This is how the most powerful minds operate, not with willpower alone, but with inner mastery. So before you chase another goal, before you burn out pretending you're fine, stop. There's something you need to see, because if you miss this, your drive will always sabotage your direction. Let me show you the habit that every ambitious person needs, but almost no one talks about. Because this is how you stop running blind and finally take control. You've been told that dopamine is your fuel, the chemical that drives motivation, hunger, achievement, and in a way, it is. But here's what they don't tell you. Dopamine doesn't reward success. It rewards the pursuit. It's not a celebration chemical. It's an anticipation chemical. And that misunderstanding? It's destroying ambitious people from the inside out. When you set a goal and begin the chase, your dopamine spikes. You feel focused, energized, alive. But if the reward doesn't come quickly, or worse, if there's a minor setback, your dopamine plummets. That's when it hits. The crash. You feel heavy, irritable, numb. And instead of interpreting that drop as a natural neurochemical response, you internalize it. You think it's you, that something's wrong with your drive. So you push harder. You chase the high instead of the vision. Neuroscientist Andrew Huberman explains that this cycle of rising and crashing dopamine without emotional regulation creates what he calls performance volatility. You swing from obsessive motivation to silent burnout, all while appearing driven on the outside. Think about it. One rejection, one slow week, one vague email, and suddenly you spiral. You're exhausted, not from failure, but from the neurochemical whiplash of riding unregulated ambition. This is the part no one talks about, the internal chaos behind the clean, curated highlight reels, the burnout behind the grind set. And the worst part? You start believing that this is normal, that being driven must feel like barely surviving. But that's the trap. You've mistaken intensity for progress, dopamine for clarity, chaos for growth. The truth is, ambition without emotional discipline is unsustainable, because dopamine doesn't care about your goals. It responds to novelty, not depth, to urgency, not purpose. So if you don't anchor it, it will anchor you to dysfunction. That's why emotional calibration isn't optional. It's the counterweight. It's how you stabilize the highs before they become addictive, and the lows before they become identity. It's how you keep moving without losing yourself in the motion. And this leads us to a deeper problem. What if the very feelings you're chasing aren't what they seem? What if the surge you label as drive is actually anxiety? What if the numbness you call discipline is just emotional shutdown? We'll uncover how your brain may be misreading its own signals, turning emotional noise into false clarity, and how that miscalibration silently sabotages every step forward you try to make. You think you know how you feel, but what if you don't? In the last chapter, we exposed how dopamine crashes can leave you burned out without warning. But here's what's even more dangerous. What happens when you mislabel that crash? When your own brain lies to you about what you're feeling? Feldman Barrett, a leading emotion researcher, reveals something few people want to hear. Emotions are not hardwired truths. They're constructed guesses. Your brain constantly interprets bodily sensations, heart rate, tension, heat, stillness, and builds stories around them. And most of the time, you believe those stories without question. That tightness in your chest, you call it motivation, but it might be pressure. That hollow feeling in your gut, you call it discipline, but it might be emotional detachment. And here's the brutal truth. Most ambitious people are emotionally blind, not because they're weak, but because they've been conditioned to override emotion in the name of achievement. So, they push when they should pause. They quit when they should lean in. They make decisions based on sensations they haven't actually examined. Your internal state is the dashboard of your entire life. But if the labels are wrong, the direction is off. You think you're in control, but really, you're flying blind. And it gets worse, because high performers are praised for ignoring their emotions, for being relentless, for staying cool under pressure. But what if that coolness is just shut down? What if that relentlessness is panic in disguise? The reason this matters is simple. Emotional misinterpretation leads to emotional sabotage. When your brain misreads your body, your mind builds plans on unstable ground. You chase goals that don't fit. You enter relationships that drain you. You build identities around emotions that were never real to begin with. And no productivity hack can fix that. This is why emotional intelligence isn't some soft skill. It's survival. It's the habit of questioning the first interpretation, of creating a pause between feeling and labeling, of asking, is this really what I think it is? And that pause, that gap between sensation and meaning, that's where your power lives. Because once you can see clearly, you can act with clarity. But until then, you're building a life on guesswork. And this leads us to a more primal layer. What if the emotion driving you isn't passion at all, but fear? Now we go deeper into the hidden conditioning behind your ambition and the invisible reward systems that keep you chasing ghosts. We exposed how your emotions aren't always what they seem, and how that confusion can sabotage everything. But here's what's even darker. You may not be pursuing your goals for fulfillment at all. You might just be trying to outrun shame. B.F. Skinner, the father of operant conditioning, proved that behavior isn't just driven by desire. It's shaped by reinforcement, rewards and punishments, triggers and consequences, pain and relief. And here's where things get dangerous for the ambitious mind. When you grow up attaching self-worth to performance, achievement becomes more than a goal. It becomes a shield. You don't chase excellence to feel alive. You chase it to avoid feeling like a failure. This is the invisible loop. You work harder to escape the sinking feeling in your chest. You push for one more milestone, not because it excites you, but because sitting still feels like self-betrayal. You build, you hustle, you climb, but underneath it all is a quiet fear whispering, if I stop, I disappear. That's not drive. That's desperation in disguise. And the worst part? It works. For a while. You get the dopamine spike, the praise, the promotion. But because the foundation is fear, the high is hollow. And once it fades, you're left with the same anxiety, plus exhaustion. This is reward anxiety. It's the emotional detachment that forms when every success feels like a temporary escape instead of real progress. You stop celebrating wins. You feel numb even when you should be proud. You live on the edge of your own nervous system, never fully arriving. And this isn't just burnout. It's emotional conditioning. You've trained yourself, through repetition, to associate rest with failure, presence with laziness, stillness with danger. But here's the brutal truth. If your ambition is built on fear, your victories will never feel safe. And that's why emotional calibration matters more than ever. Because until you break that Skinnerian loop, you're not choosing your path. You're reacting to pain. This is where we begin to lose our sense of clarity, control, and truth. And if it continues, your ambition can morph into something colder, something strategic, manipulative, hollow. It's time to explore the slippery slope of ungrounded ambition. How even those who reach the top can end up feeling completely lost inside. Niccolò Machiavelli once wrote that power without control destroys itself, and when ambition isn't grounded in emotional clarity, something strange starts to happen. You begin to prioritize perception over truth. You stop asking, is this right for me? You start asking, whoa, will this make me look powerful? You shift from internal alignment to external manipulation. At first it feels strategic, calculated, impressive. You know what to say, how to act, which mask to wear. But inside, you're drifting. You stop feeling. You start performing. This is strategic blindness, the slow erosion of emotional feedback in favor of control. You become brilliant at winning and terrible at being real. And the deeper you go, the colder it gets. You tell yourself you're focused, efficient, in command, but underneath it all is emotional detachment so profound, it becomes identity. You no longer lead with clarity. You manipulate to survive. You build success, but feel nothing when you arrive. And here's the brutal truth. Uncalibrated ambition doesn't make you more effective. It makes you more hollow. You become a shell of high performance, polished on the outside, empty on the inside. This is Machiavelli's silent warning. Not that ambition is dangerous, but that ambition without self-awareness always decays into performance, into optics over outcomes, into strategy over soul. And maybe you've felt this already. That strange numbness after a win, the growing gap between who you show and who you are, the way you check your reflection more than your direction. But here's the thing, you don't have to keep splitting yourself in two. You don't have to become efficient at pretending. You can lead without losing your center. You can drive without emotional coldness. But to do that, you need more than strategy. You need grounding. You need presence. You need a reason to stop performing and start becoming. Which leads us to the real curse of high ambition, the addiction to always becoming more, without ever learning how to simply be. Now, we enter the mind of Nietzsche, where relentless striving becomes a prison, and your identity starts to dissolve in the pursuit of what's next. Friedrich Nietzsche warned of a deep danger in the human spirit, the obsession with the will to power, the relentless drive to become more, do more, conquer more. But in that eternal becoming, something essential is lost, the ability to simply be. And this is where ambition turns on itself. You start living in a future that never arrives. You become addicted to the next version of yourself, a better body, a bigger win, a sharper brand, a louder name. At first it feels like growth, but over time, it becomes a sickness. You start treating the present as an obstacle, not a moment. You become restless in stillness, agitated in peace, empty in quiet. And here's the brutal part. The more you become, the less you recognize who you are. You're chasing progress, but losing your presence. You're building identity, but losing your integrity. That's the curse Nietzsche pointed to. When ambition disconnects from essence, becoming becomes a trap. You confuse evolution with escape. You call it hunger, but it's avoidance in disguise. And the result? Existential fatigue. Not just tiredness, but soul-deep exhaustion from carrying a self that's always one step ahead of you. You wake up with a weight on your chest, not from failure, but from endlessness. Nothing feels done. Nothing feels enough. You don't know how to arrive, because your mind was never taught how to stay. This is where emotional imbalance roots itself, where life becomes a constant update, never a lived experience, where you're always in transition, never in truth. And the cost isn't just burnout, it's identity erosion. Because if you're always becoming, who are you when you stop? That question haunts high achievers. Because stopping feels like death, like disappearing, like being forgotten. But maybe the answer isn't in stopping. Maybe it's in anchoring, in learning to become from a place of presence, not panic. And this leads us to a shift. If becoming without being destroys you, what does it look like to reclaim control from within? In the next step, we step into the mind of Epictetus, where true discipline isn't about pushing harder, but about commanding what's already yours, your inner state. Here's the truth you've been missing. You don't need to become someone else to be in control. You need to master what's already within. Enter Epictetus, a Stoic philosopher who had every reason to feel powerless, born a slave, broken in body, but became one of the most powerful minds in history, not because he controlled the world, but because he controlled his response to it. He taught that freedom isn't about changing your circumstances. It's about owning your reactions. And in a world addicted to speed, noise, and stimulation, that kind of control is rare and priceless. This is internal discipline, not the grind, not the perfect morning routine, not white-knuckling through discomfort, but the quiet daily practice of pausing before reacting, of asking, what am I actually feeling right now? And then reframing, not repressing. It's not passivity, it's precision. It's not weakness, it's command. But here's what's really happening. Most ambitious people skip this step. They think action is everything, so they react before they reflect. They chase before they check in, and they confuse movement with momentum. The result? They burn out chasing clarity they never stopped long enough to find. But Epictetus flips the script. He invites you to create space. Space between the trigger and your reaction, between your emotion and your interpretation, between the urge to act and the wisdom to wait. And that space? That's where you reclaim your sovereignty. That's where you stop being ruled by external chaos and start living from internal clarity. Because emotional discipline doesn't mean suppressing what you feel. It means owning it, naming it, sitting with it, and then choosing your next move, not as a reaction, but as a response. That's the foundation of sustainable ambition, not intensity, not urgency, but sovereignty. And once you've built that internal citadel, once you can pause, reflect, and reframe in real time, ambition becomes a weapon you control, not a force that consumes you. But without it, you run the risk of building a life that looks strong while rotting quietly from within. And that leads us to a deeper fracture. When your emotional truth and your external path don't align, even discipline becomes betrayal. Now we confront the silent dissonance of chasing success that no longer feels like yours. Here's the haunting truth that follows. Even the strongest inner discipline means nothing if you're headed in the wrong direction. Because emotional mastery isn't just about how you move, it's about where you're going and why. And this is where misalignment quietly takes over. You can have the structure, you can have the strategy, you can even have the discipline, but if your ambition is built on an identity that no longer fits, everything you build will feel wrong. You'll hit milestones and feel nothing. You'll achieve your dream life and wonder why it tastes like dust. Because deep down, your emotional truth isn't in sync with your external path. This is the misalignment effect. It doesn't explode. It doesn't scream. It whispers. It hides beneath productivity. It wears the mask of high performance. And that's what makes it so dangerous. You wake up with a knot in your stomach, not because you're lazy, but because your soul is quietly rejecting the path you've been forcing it to walk. You feel drained after wins, disconnected in relationships, hollow inside systems that once made you feel alive. And because you've been praised for your ambition, you keep going. You override the signs. You call it a rough patch. You double down. And in doing so, you betray yourself. This is how burnout becomes betrayal, not of others, of yourself. Because what's fueling the collapse isn't the workload, it's the dissonance. It's waking up each day wearing an armor that no longer fits, chasing goals that no longer speak your name. And here's the most brutal part. Most people don't catch this until it's too late, until their health fails, until their relationships fracture, until the ambition they built their life around becomes the very thing that breaks them. But it doesn't have to end like that. If you can develop the habit of emotional check-ins, of asking, does this still feel like mine? You catch the drift before it becomes a rift. You correct course before collapse. Because clarity isn't just about focus, it's about alignment. And without alignment, no amount of discipline will save you. Which brings us to the final piece, the daily, practiced habit that brings all of this together, the anchor that keeps your ambition honest, sustainable, and real. Let's talk about it. You've come this far. You've peeled back the layers. You've faced the burnout, the emotional blindness, the fear-driven loops, the hollow ambition, the endless becoming, the misalignment. And now you're standing here, maybe a little raw, maybe a little shaken, wondering, so how do I fix it? Not perfectly, not all at once, but daily, quietly, deliberately. Because the transformation you're looking for doesn't come from some grand breakthrough. It comes from one deceptively simple habit, done consistently with brutal honesty. It's the emotional audit, a daily check-in, a moment of truth. No masks, no performance, No pressure to be on. Just you, asking yourself, what am I actually feeling right now? Where is this sensation showing up in my body? What story am I telling myself about this feeling? Is it guiding me or hijacking me? That's it. No cold plunge, no miracle morning. Just presence, just awareness. Because when you develop this habit, something powerful shifts. You stop reacting, you start responding. You stop chasing, you start choosing. You begin to recognize the difference between drive and desperation, between purpose and panic, between aligned effort and emotional self-betrayal. This is what creates sustainable ambition. Not just the fire to move forward, but the anchor that keeps you from drifting into chaos. Because here's what's really happening. Most people don't fail because they lack talent or discipline. They fail because they're running full speed in the wrong direction, detached from what they feel, and blind to what they need. But you're not most people. You're here, still listening, still breathing, still ready to realign. And that means you're ready for this habit, this small pause, this inner scan, this moment of reconnection with what's real. It won't make you invincible, but it will make you clear. And clarity, that's your power. That's how you walk into rooms different. That's how you speak with intention. That's how you build a life that feels as good as it looks. Not for them, for you. So tomorrow, before you check your phone, before you dive into the grind, ask yourself, what's really going on in here? And what do I need to hear from myself today? Because that's not weakness, that's inner mastery. And that's just the beginning. Now you know. It was never about working harder. It was never about waking up earlier, pushing through, or stacking more habits on top of a nervous system screaming for relief. The missing piece was never effort. It was calibration. Because ambition without emotional awareness isn't strength, it's a storm. It whirls you into movement but never lets you land. It keeps you chasing more, while slowly disconnecting you from you. And maybe now, looking back at everything we've unpacked, dopamine crashes, misread emotions, fear-based motivation, identity erosion, silent misalignment, something finally clicks. You weren't broken. You were just uncalibrated. You were running without checking your internal compass. And the moment you paused, the moment you asked, is this actually what I feel? Does this actually matter to me? You stepped into power most people never touch. Not because they're incapable, but because they're terrified of stopping long enough to feel. But you stopped. You listened. You stayed. And that means something. That means you're no longer just ambitious. You're conscious. You're no longer just chasing success. You're creating meaning. You're not just surviving the pressure. You're learning how to use it, to sharpen your direction, not blur it. That's emotional calibration. It's not glamorous. It's not viral. But it's real. It's what keeps you from burning out in silence. It's what helps you say yes to what aligns and no to what corrodes. And it's yours now. So here's what I ask. If this resonated, really resonated, don't just move on. Subscribe. Not for numbers, but because this space is for people like you. People who feel deeply, think relentlessly, and refuse to live on autopilot. Comment, I'm calibrating, if you're ready to show up for yourself differently. Let's flood the algorithm with intention. Let's show that emotional discipline isn't weakness, it's evolution. And finally, don't stop here. This was one part of the transformation. If ambition is the engine, identity is the architecture. And too many people are building lives based on old blueprints, beliefs they never chose, identities shaped by fear. Breathe, check in, and keep your compass close.